It started with a drizzle, the kind of soft London rain that didn't soak you instantly but crept in layer by layer. Tom Holland ducked into a tucked-away vintage store in Camden to wait it out, file. Not for fashion, just for cover. The shop was warm, musty, lit with amber-tinted bulbs that hummed quietly. A bell tinkled overhead, and the door thudded shut behind him. Rows of coats, worn boots, and hats with stories that whispered through worn seams surrounded him. Tom exhaled, glad to be off the street. He wasn't there to buy anything, really, just killing time between shoots. But something caught his eye. A woolen military-style coat hanging at the far end, slightly out of place among the leather jackets and track tops. It was double-breasted, navy blue, and had an understated elegance that felt forgotten. Curious, Tom pulled it off the rack. As he slipped it on, the fit was surprisingly snug, almost like it had been waiting for someone with his exact frame. He grinned, checking himself in the mirror, turning slightly to admire the coat's tailoring. And that's when he heard it. A faint clink from the inside lining. He reached into the pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished object wrapped in aged fabric. When he unrolled it, his heart skipped. It was a military medal, dulled by time but unmistakably real. The kind of medal awarded for bravery, for sacrifice. On the badge, just below a tiny crest, was an engraving, to Sergeant W.E. Carter, for valor beyond duty. Tom stared at the name, the weight of it suddenly anchoring the moment. He asked the store owner about the coat, but the man just shrugged. Donation box stuff, mate. People drop things off all the time. Never know what's in the pockets. Tom didn't leave right away. Instead, he sat near the front of the store, the coat still on, medal in hand, tapping into something that felt out of place in his otherwise fast-moving world. There was a story here. A man, a medal, and a forgotten thread of history sewn into the lining of a coat no one had worn in decades. He didn't know why yet, but he couldn't let it go. That night, back in his flat, the medal sat on his nightstand. He stared at it long after the lights were out, the engraved name echoing in his thoughts. Who was Sergeant Carter? And why had this medal, the symbol of someone's ultimate moment, ended up lost inside an old coat in a dusty shop? Tom Holland didn't know it yet, but the journey he was about to take wouldn't just uncover someone else's forgotten legacy. It would change the trajectory of his own. Tom wasn't the type to obsess, but 2 days after he bought the coat, he was still thinking about the medal, about Sergeant W.E. Carter, about the way the medal felt in his hand, cold, proud, heavy. He tried searching online. A few scattered results came up, records of Carters who had served in different wars. Too many names, too little detail, nothing that confirmed who his Sergeant Carter was. But one forum thread mentioned that a Walter Elijah Carter, a Royal Army veteran believed to be living alone on the outskirts of Kent. No phone number, just a vague address from a wartime reunion list dated 15 years ago. Tom stared at the screen. He had things to do, rehearsals, interviews, emails, but none of it seemed urgent compared to this strange pull in his chest. So he got in his car. The rain followed him out of London, turning into sleet as the city gave way to countryside. The small house sat at the end of a narrow road, nestled between two overgrown hedges. It was weathered with peeling paint and shuttered windows, the kind of place that hadn't seen company in years. Tom hesitated at the gate. He wasn't sure what he expected. Gratitude? Answers? A door slammed in his face. He knocked. Nothing. Another knock. Still silence. He was turning to leave when the door creaked open. An old man stood in the doorway, tall, thin, with skin like folded leather and eyes that had seen too many yesterdays. He wore a cardigan patched at the elbows and held a cane carved with initials. Yes, the man asked, not unkind but cautious. Mr. Carter? Tom asked. Walter Elijah Carter? The man tilted his head slightly, eyebrows twitching. Depends on who's asking. Tom took the medal from his coat pocket and held it out gently. I found this in a vintage coat I bought. It had your name on it. The old man stared at it. His hand didn't move. His mouth didn't move. But his eyes, they changed, flickered, softened. That belonged to someone I used to buy at Batain. To be, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Come in. The house smelled of cedar and silence. Faded photographs lined the mantel, none recent. A black and white image of a young soldier standing proudly next to a tank caught Tom's eye. The man looked just like him. They sat across from each other, the medal between them on a scratched coffee table. Walter began slowly. That was 1964, North Africa. I was just 24. Didn't think I'd live to see 20. Tom listened, really listened, as the old man began to unravel memories no one had asked about in decades. A mission gone wrong, a rescue through enemy lines, a comrade who didn't make it, and a moment barely a minute long, that had earned him the medal, a medal he'd buried in his coat pocket and forgotten. Why? Tom finally asked. Why hide it away? Walter smiled faintly. Some medals shine, others weigh. I didn't feel like a hero. I just wanted to come home. They sat in silence after that. Tom didn't need to speak. The air was heavy with unspoken things: loss, memory, time. Then Walter leaned forward, voice steadier now. But you found it, after all these years. You came all this way to return something no one remembered. That, that means something. Tom nodded. It meant something to you. That was enough. Walter stood with effort, walking over to a nearby cabinet. He returned with a dusty film canister and slid it across the table. I was a projectionist once after the war, before the world forgot. Inside, there's footage I took during those years. Never shown, no one ever cared enough to ask. Tom looked at the canister, confused. Why give this to me? Walter's eyes twinkled. Because people watch you. Because maybe you can tell a story better than I ever could. And because I won't be around much longer. A silence settled between them again. One filled with reverence this time. Tom left with the medal tucked securely back in his coat and the film reel in his hands. Something had changed in him. Fame had made him seen. But this journey, this man, had made him feel. And now there was a story to finish, one worth remembering. The reel clattered softly against Tom's desk as he set it down that night, the edges still dusted with time. He stared at it for a long time before he touched it. The silence of Walter's home still echoed in his ears, the way the man had stared out the window like he was watching ghosts drift by. There was something haunting in that house, but there was also something sacred. Tom made a few calls. 2 weeks later, he stood at the British Film Institute in a private screening room, surrounded by a small group: film historians, a documentary director he trusted, and a single empty chair with a folded military cap on it. Walter had died 3 days earlier. No one had called, no next of kin, no headlines, just a quiet departure, as if he'd faded back into history the way he had lived the last half of his life, unseen. Tom had the obituary placed himself, paid for it, wrote every word. Walter Elijah Carter, decorated veteran, projectionist, and storyteller. He served without seeking glory and lived without asking the world to remember. But now we do. When the lights dimmed, the room stilled. The reel flickered to life on the screen. It was raw, grainy, but full of soul. The footage wasn't about war. It was about what came after. Soldiers rebuilding homes, playing with children, crying in fields. One shot showed Walter himself, young and sunburnt, laughing as he fixed a broken bicycle for a French child. Another panned over rows of graves, Walter narrating quietly. We came back with scars they couldn't see, and stories we couldn't tell. There was no score, just real sound, wind, boots crunching soil, murmured prayers. Halfway through, the room was silent except for the sound of tears. Soft, stifled, respectful. And Tom, he watched like a man seeing history for the first time. After the screening, no one moved. A few whispered questions, but mostly silence. Reverence. Tom stepped forward, voice catching slightly. This wasn't supposed to be a film. Not really. Walter never edited it, never named it. But I think it was a film, just one waiting for the right time to be seen. He looked around the room. He told me he wasn't a hero, that he just wanted to come home. But heroes aren't always on magazine covers or movie posters. Sometimes they're old men in dusty houses with stories locked in forgotten reels. And then Tom announced his next project. We're going to restore this footage. We're going to build a documentary around Walter's voice, his memories. We're going to call it The Forgotten Medal, because no one should disappear without someone saying they mattered. The story caught fire faster than Tom expected. Articles, interviews, tributes. People who had served with Walter came forward. Others who had heard of him. Even one letter from a woman in France who remembered the man who fixed her bicycle in 1964. Soon, the documentary was funded, and Tom insisted on producing it himself. But that wasn't all. On the anniversary of Walter's passing, Tom hosted a public screening of The Forgotten Medal at a restored cinema in Kent, the same town Walter had lived in. Hundreds showed up. Veterans, students, fans. A group of school children placed poppies at the foot of the stage before the film began. In the foyer, a small exhibition had been set up. One glass case held the original medal, Sergeant Walter Elijah Carter's honor, now polished, mounted on velvet, beside a single photo of the young man standing tall in uniform. And next to it, a quote on the wall: "Some medals shine, others weigh." After the lights dimmed, as people quietly left, Tom stood by the medal case. One boy lingered near him, maybe 12, looking up at the display with wide eyes. Was he famous? The boy asked. Tom smiled. Not before, but he mattered. And that's even better. The boy nodded thoughtfully. Tom stepped outside into the cold night. He looked up at the stars and thought of Walter. Of all the untold stories buried in attics, sewn into coats, left behind in silence. And he made himself a quiet promise. He would never stop listening for them. Because sometimes all it takes to make someone immortal is to remember them out loud. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like the video to honor forgotten heroes. Subscribe for more true and inspired stories that bring unseen lives into the light. Comment below. What stories do you think deserve to be remembered? And hit the bell so you never miss a story that could change how you see the world. Because sometimes remembering someone is the greatest act of love we can give.